The late Robert Morris. Robert Morris, the custodian of the Beale Papers, was born in 1778, in the state of Maryland, but removed at an early age, with his family, to Loudoun County, Va. where, in 1803, he married Miss Sarah Mitchell, a fine-looking and accomplished young lady of that county. In obtaining such a wife, Mr. Morris was peculiarly fortunate, as her subsequent career fully demonstrated. As a wife she was without reproach, as a generous and sympathizing woman she was without an equal. The poor will long remember her charities, and lament the friend they have lost. Shortly after his removal to Lynchburg, Mr. Morris engaged in the mercantile business, and shortly thereafter he became a purchaser and shipper of tobacco to an extent hitherto unknown in this section. In these pursuits he was eminently successful for several years, and speedily accumulated a comfortable independence. It was during this period of his success that he erected the first brick building of which the town could boast, and which still stands on Main Street, a monument to his enterprise. His private residence, the house now owned and occupied by Max Guggenheimer, Esquire, at the head of Main Street, I think he also built. There the most unbounded hospitality reigned, and every facility for enjoyment was furnished. The elite of the town assembled there more frequently than elsewhere, and there are now living some whose most pleasant recollections are associated with that period. The happiness of Mr. Morris, however, was of short duration, and reverses came when they were least expected. Heavy purchases of tobacco, at ruinous figures, in anticipation of an upward market, which visions were never realized, swept from him in a moment the savings of years, and left him nothing save his honor and the sincere sympathy of the community with which to begin the battle anew. It was at this time that Mrs. Morris exhibited the loveliest traits of her character. Seemingly unmindful of her condition, with a smiling face and cheering words, she so encouraged her husband that he became almost reconciled to his fate. Thrown thus upon his own resources, by the advice of his wife, he leased for a term of years the Washington Hotel, known now as the Arlington, on Church Street, and commenced the business of hotel keeping. His kind disposition, strict probity, excellent management, and well-ordered household, soon rendered him famous as a host, and his reputation extended even to other states. His was the house par excellence of the town, and no fashionable assemblages met at any other. Finding, in a few years, that his experiment was successful and his business remunerative, he removed to the Franklin Hotel, now the Norval House, the largest and best arranged in the city. This house he conducted for many years, enjoying the friendship and countenance of the first men of the country. Amongst his guests and devoted personal friends Jackson, Clay, Coles, Witcher, Chief Justice Marshall, and a host of others scarcely less distinguished, might be enumerated. But it was not the wealthy and distinguished alone who appreciated Mr. Morris. The poor and lowly had blessings for the man who sympathized with their misfortunes, and was ever ready to relieve their distress. Many poor but worthy families, whose descendants are now in our midst, can remember the fact that his table supplied their daily food, not for days and weeks only, but for months at a time. And as a farther instance of his forbearance and unparalleled generosity, there are now living those who will testify to the fact that he permitted a boarder in no way connected with him, to remain in his house for more than 20 years, and until he died, without ever receiving the slightest remuneration, and that he was never made to feel otherwise than as a favored guest. In manner Mr. Morris was courteous and gentle, but when occasion demanded, could be stern and determined, too. He was emphatically the master of his house, and from his decision there was no appeal. As an old Virginia gentleman, he was sans peur sans reproach, and to a remarkable extent possessed the confidence and affection of his friends. After a checkered and eventful life of more than 80 years, passed mostly in business, which brought him in contact with all classes of people, he died, lamented by all, and leaving not an enemy behind. His death, which occurred in 1863, was just 2 years subsequent to that of his wife. It can be truly said that no persons ever lived in a community for such a length of time who accomplished more good during their lives, or whose death was more universally regretted. It was the unblemished character of the man, and the universal confidence there reposed in him, that induced Beale to entrust him with his secret, and in certain contingencies select him for a most important trust. That his confidence was not misplaced, everyone remembering Mr. Morris will acknowledge. It was in 1862, the second year of the Confederate War, that Mr. Morris first intimated the possession of a secret that was destined to make some persons wealthy. At first he was not very communicative, nor did I press him to reveal what he seemed to speak of with reluctance. In a few weeks, however, his mind seemed changed, and he voluntarily proffered his confidence. Inviting me to his room, with no one to interrupt us, he gave me an outline of the matter, which soon enlisted my interest and created an intense longing to learn more. About this time, however, affairs of importance required my presence in Richmond, and prevented further communication between us until after my return, when I found him ready to resume the interesting subject. A private interview was soon arranged, and, after several preliminaries had been complied with, the papers upon which this history is based were delivered into my possession. The reasons which influenced him in selecting me for the trust, he gave, and were in substance as follows. First, friendship for myself and family, whom he would benefit if he could. Second, the knowledge that I was young and in circumstances to afford leisure for the task imposed. And finally, a confidence that I would regard his instructions, and carry out his wishes regarding his charge. These, and perhaps others, he gave during our frequent conversations upon the subject, and doubtless believed he was conferring a favor which would redound greatly to my advantage. That as has proved otherwise is a misfortune to me, but no fault of his. The conditions alluded to above were that I should devote as much time as was practicable to the papers he had given me, master, if possible, their contents, and if successful in deciphering their meaning and eventually finding the treasure, to appropriate one half of his portion as a remuneration for my services, the other half to be distributed to certain relatives and connections of his own, whose names he gave me, the remainder to be held by me in trust for the benefit of such claimants as might at any time appear, and be able to authenticate their claims. This latter amount, to be left intact, subject to such demands, for the space of 20 years, when, if still unclaimed, it should revert to myself or my heirs, as a legacy from himself. As there was nothing objectionable in this, the required promise was given, and the box and the contents were placed in my possession.